What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Manny here. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to 2019. And welcome to another episode of Technique Training for Beginners, part 3 actually already, where I want to give you some examples on how you can actually train technique via technique-specific problems. And as usual, we're going to see Thorsten climb some technique routes in our gym to illustrate that, while I'm going to run my mouth trying to basically analyze the juice out of it. This time we're going to take a look at Gastons and Crossovers. Last time we discussed backsteps and flags. If you haven't seen that one yet, check it out. We're going to need some of the basics also in this episode. Before we get into further detail, let me just get a little bit of theory off my chest here. Sometimes climbing techniques are more obviously connected with each other, like in the backstep versus flag example, where almost always a backstep can be exchanged or substituted via a flag. So where is the, I would say, rather less significant connection between the Gaston and the crossover? Why do I want to have them both in this episode? You could ask. Well, first of all, both are rather gripping techniques than stepping techniques. So we're looking at hands and arms this time relatively independently from feet. Secondly, there is an interesting morphological connection. There is a tendency that people who are naturally good at Gastons tend to be not so good at crossovers and vice versa. This depends on the ratio between the length of someone's arms to his or her shoulder width and the resulting reach and leverages, because really Gastons and crossovers are on the opposite sides of the same, let's call it, moving further spectrum. If you're more interested in that, check out my video on ideal genetics for rock climbing, where I go into further detail. Thirdly, and probably most relevant to this video, we have problem character, of course, which often dictates whether a Gaston or a crossover is more efficient, and here we have to take a closer look at holds directionality and order, and the question whether holds are matchable or not. Because what the two have in common is that they can be executed in somewhat similar situations, namely very basically when two holds are situated laterally to diagonal to each other, and when the lower, the starting hold, exhibits a directionality that points away from the upper or the target hold. So let's move over to some practical examples here. Let's take a look at this route. As you can see, we've got lots of diagonally placed holds, very repetitive, very straightforward. Now, because these holds are also kind of far apart and because the directionalities all point outwards, this is very indicative for shoulder type moves, or Gastons as they are called. If we're climbing the same route but trying to execute each move as a crossover, we're soon gonna run into problems because of lack of reach essentially, especially if we're not equipped with super long arms like Thorsten. So generally it can be said the reachier it gets, the more Gastons are indicated rather than crossovers. Let's take a look at this route where holds are much closer together and more all over the place. Again, directionalities point outwards in certain situations, but due to hold placement and distance, it is more efficient to go with crossovers this time because it requires the least amount of single moves and therefore gets you through the problem in the quickest mode, so to say. Of course, it is also possible to climb this route with a Gaston-like fashion, as you can see, but it makes everything feel kind of chunky and unflowy, and it takes more single moves. Another factor is that because these routes are generally more on the easy side, holds are big and can be matched. Hold order is therefore less relevant, resulting in a great number of possible solutions containing Gastons and crossovers and hold matches. If we take a look at this problem, a recent boulder I created on the system wall, here a crossover is obligatory, or at least a lot easier than the corresponding Gaston, which would require me to match this super bad beige hold to be able to still get to the big yellow sloper with my left hand. So again, as usual, it can be said that great reach and great finger strength and small fingers will maximize the number of options available to the climber, and climbing is just too complex of a sport to give out general recommendations. Rather, we have to analyze each situation individually. Another thing I'd like to mention is that both Gastons and crossovers tend to be executed rather statically by most climbers. This doesn't necessarily have to be that way, as this shot of Thorsten demonstrates, where he executes pretty much all Gastons rather dynamically, which is definitely more efficient in this case. Now of course, as usual, we can't generalize here. Situations involving bigger holds and bigger distances will usually call for more dynamic solutions, while smaller holds demand more precision and therefore more static solutions. When it's possible though, a dynamic solution always has the potential to be more energy efficient than the corresponding static solution, as I discussed in my dynamic versus static climbing episode. One more thing needs to be mentioned in conjunction with Gastons and Crossovers, and that's the corresponding footwork and body position. It is quite interesting to note that the majority of true Gaston moves will be executed in a rather frontal body position, hips as close to the wall as possible and knees turned outwards. That's why a good dose of hip flexibility can help a lot with these moves. Crossovers, on the other hand, can be executed not only frontally but also very well, in fact, in a backstep position, hips turned sidewards and as close to the wall again. Sometimes foothold placement actually will favor a backstepped or flagged crossover by increasing your reach. On other occasions, a more frontal crossover will be more ideal. So again, we can't generalize here. What I'm rather trying to do here really is to enrich your climbing technique toolbox with more tools and therefore more options to go through when you check out your next problem, hopefully allowing you to find the most efficient solution for you more quickly. To summarize, Gastons and Crossovers are pretty much on opposite sides of the moving further spectrum when it comes to arm work, so to say, and therefore climbers usually have one favorite depending on their body type. Long arms and narrow shoulders favor Crossovers, and short arms and wide shoulders favor more Gastons. Whether a crossover or Gaston is indicated by a certain problem depends mostly on hold order, hold directionality, and matchability of those holds. Greater distance calls for Gastons, smaller distance for Crossovers, and matchable holds in general just increase the options. Gastons and Crossovers do not necessarily have to be executed so statically as most climbers I know execute them, although smaller target holds call for more static solutions obviously. In terms of footwork and body position, Gastons usually call for a more frontal approach, which is why hip flexibility often really shines here, whereas on Crossovers a backstep or flag can be useful as well to increase reach even further, if foothold placement allows it. That's pretty much it for this episode, my friends. Please consider leaving a like or a comment if you got something from it. I'd highly appreciate it. And apart from that, I really gotta say, I wish you a successful new year. I hope you had a nice Silvester, it's called in German. New Year's, I think it's called in English. Yeah, I certainly did. I used the chance to rest a little bit and I feel really fit and ready to attack some projects, I have to say. Let's see what the conditions bring. But anyway, see you soon in the next one, guys. Bye.